So the other part of safety and risk management in our industry is a variety of alphabet standards.
Yeah.
What are those, and how do they kind of fit into the fray?
Yeah, one of the questions that I encourage folks to evaluate is it appropriate to use an external standard? You know, legal is the obvious one. We're always going to be legal. Then, do we want to raise the bar above legal? Because legal is actually quite honestly a fairly low operational bar.
And when you say legal, you're talking FAA.
We're talking FAA,
Okay.
That's exactly right. So there exists really some major standards, the most popular being ISBAO. I mean, your previous operation, you've had exposure to ISBAO.
Absolutely.
And most aviation teams are fluent with that standard. It's modeled after ISO. But there are some other standards that have developed which may be more unique for your organization. There's BASC, which is the Business Aviation Safety Consortium. There's BARS, which is the Basic Aviation Risk Standard, which comes out of the Flight Safety Foundation. And there are, third-party folks that offer individual standards based on their own set of protocols. VanAllen does that. There's a number of other vendors that do that.
And these are all voluntary.
They are all voluntary. Yeah. And really the question you have to ask yourself, and this is a collaborative conversation with the aviation team and the executive of aviation reports, is what's appropriate for our organization? One of the challenges we oftentimes see is the aviation leaders solve for what they feel comfortable with. They oftentimes aren't thinking about the organization and what's appropriate for them. We certainly never want them to take risks that they're not comfortable with, but they're oftentimes accepting risks that the company may not want them to accept.
And if I'm an executive or an executive who manages aviation, what are these standards telling me?
Yes, it's a great question. So any one of the standards we've mentioned really have ongoing conversation in the industry about what are the right things to do. It's not just one person's ideas, it's a collaborative conversation. All of them have an element of risk management discipline, which would look very similar to what you do on a deal analysis, on a business case where you identify the risk, where you quantify it is. You may accept it, you may mitigate it. Aviation teams have learned to do that if they're following one of these protocols.
Yeah, and Peter, in the technical world, aviation maintenance is mandated by either the OEM or the FAA, or both.
Absolutely.
So how do these alphabet soup, standards help increase and improve maintenance from your perspective?
Well, when you look at the way those standards are published, you have to look at, first of all, when the licensed technician is working on the aircraft, he's meeting a minimum standard just to be licensed to work on it. But having that additional standards in there so that he's protected both under the OSHA program when he's working in a facility and needs fall protection, needs fire protection, and all those standards that we look at on a daily basis, they just help in giving them the tools they need to stay safe while they're maintaining an aircraft at high altitudes in the tail, or whether they're working on a slippery floor, or whether they're handling hazardous chemicals. These are all things that they need to take into consideration every day when they're working on the aircraft.
And that's all workplace environment.
Workplace.
But do I enhance my maintenance with anything else that I would be doing under a safety standard that's been published? Is my maintenance better because I'm ISBAO? Is my aircraft more reliable because I'm ISBAO?
Not necessarily. That's why you'll find that there are firms that don't necessarily go into the ISBAO standards, but they find a standard that works for them. But the most important is they want to be efficient about it, depending on how the aircraft are being handled. If it's a high utilization aircraft, some of those standards hinder what they need to do on a daily basis because they're aggressively working on the aircraft. Other departments who don't have those restrictions are more willing to add more standards in because they feel it's better safety culture for that firm.
Peter, you raise a really interesting point, and that is really the analysis of what's the right risk standard for you. Right. We oftentimes see aviation teams just go, we're going to be ISBAO, we're going to be BASC, we're going to be BARS, without really understanding the impact, and probably in the maintenance world, having the biggest variable.
That's correct. A lot of times when technicians are instructed by the director of maintenance to do specific tasks, they're doing those tasks to a standard and don't even know it sometimes because they recognize what it is to be efficient, but at the same time they have to be safe. in that environment. So they may not have that written down somewhere, but they very well could be accomplishing it under it.
How about the investment in this? This is, I mean, what kind of return on investment? Am I going to invest $40,000 in a standard and then I'm going to get 10% safer? How do you quantify that, or can you?
Yes, there's a portion of that which is quantifiable. As a percentage of the total operating expense of an aviation team, it's a relatively low number. Would you be interested in, increasing your operational expense by 3% if it gave you a very clear quantification of all the risks that are happening in the organization, introduced a disciplined process to risk identification and mitigation? You're going to probably adopt that. That falls under the category of just the right thing to do.
But yet there's still a hidden cost, which is the workload that might be associated
Sure.
with managing a program.
Yeah. That's an interesting question we'll talk about in the staffing conversation. Do we staff for the operational demand, or do we staff for the true leadership component of what does a healthy aviation team look like? We see a lot of companies struggle with that.
And just as well on the technical side as?
Absolutely. In most cases, when I've been director of maintenance for a number of firms, I always look at the efficiencies of what my technicians should be doing, and that's most critical to me. Of course, risk safety is in that equation, but I need to balance that with what I need to do for that particular demand on the aircraft.